So first of all, I would like to welcome everyone who has joined in today's webinar on patient partnerships in PCD research. I am Myrona Goutaki. I am a senior clinical epidemiologist and co-chair of the BEAT-PCD clinical research collaboration. And I'm very happy to co-organize this today together with Lucy Dixon. Lucy, would you like to introduce yourself a bit?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Lucy Dixon. I was the chair of PCD Support UK for about 3 years, and I've volunteered with the charity since 2014, helping connect people with sort of information about PCD, but a large part of this is also connecting people to research in PCD as well. Um,
So
yes, sorry, Myrona.
today's webinar has a mixed audience. So we wanted to do that in the framework of PCD Awareness Month, October. And we thought that it's a good opportunity to invite both researchers that they might be interested to involve more patients as partners in their research and they don't know where to start or they want some advice, but also patients or parents of children with PCD that they might be interested to be more involved in research and they also want to hear a bit more our experience about that. And I think for that, Lucy, you can give a bit more feedback before we start with some general points.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to mention to anyone who is a patient joining this call or watching it back that if you are interested in research in PCD, there's never really been a better time to get involved in research. Only 10 years ago, there really wasn't much happening at all. And suddenly, in the past 10 years, this has absolutely expanded. And there's really amazing and interesting research happening in PCD all over the globe, including lots of international collaborations. And so there are increasing opportunities to get involved. But if you're starting out and you've never been involved in research and you're a patient with PCD, it might be a bit strange working out how to do this and what kind of involvement what involvement looks like. And so really what I wanted to really stress is that there's lots of levels of being involved in research, which Myrona will talk about more from a researcher perspective, but that is very relevant for patients. But in my experience as a patient who's been involved in lots of different types of projects, there are a few things that I think you can come to expect and that are really important to bear in mind as we go forward. So I will mention these quickly now, but we will be also having a conversation about this towards the end of the talk. So I really encourage you to stick around until then. But you can expect to have a reciprocal partnership. You can expect to have time to consider the information that you are presented with, and you can expect in some situations to be remunerated for your involvement. Not always, but that is something that we will talk about later. But more than anything, from my own experience, being a patient involved in research with PCD gives a whole other perspective to living with this condition. So you can see behind me now, this is not a typical office environment. It's a hospital room because I live with PCD myself and I'm having treatment. But actually, there's a lot of positive experiences that I have got from being involved in research, and you get to know that it's actually really helping people in the community and helping us develop understanding of this condition. So it's really exciting to be here today and to be doing this talk with Myrona. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Just so that the people are aware, we have structured today's webinar in three parts. I have a few slides that put some general information about what it is, these patient partnerships that we are referring to, and some examples from our own experience. Like Lucy and I had quite a few examples on PCD research projects that we have collaborated together, and we will go through these to get the opportunity to share our experiences. Then we will have, after this short presentation, an exchange with some questions among each other that we have prepared to help guide this conversation on this topic. And at the end, there will be time to get questions from all of you attending. So please, either wait for the end, though you can raise your hand and ask your question directly, or you can put your questions in the chat throughout And then we have several people from our colleagues that can help us ask these questions on your behalf. Some housekeeping, we have activated live subtitles. These are made with artificial intelligence, so they are not perfect. You can see the instructions on how to activate them on your screen. You have to go on the bottom, click show captions, and then you can select the translation, and you always should put as speaking language English, because both me and Lucy together today will talk in English. And then as caption language, you can choose your own language that you want to see the subtitles in. We will try to speak slowly and clearly as much as possible. So we hope that this will help more people to participate and understand today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available on the BEAT-PCD website, hopefully from next week onwards. So if you find it useful, you can also share it with your colleagues or friends, or even go back and check some information if you would like to. So to start with this presentation, I wanted first to clarify what we will be talking about. We're talking about patient partnerships, which is, for me, the most dedicated part of what we call a patient involvement and engagement in research. So we are not talking about participating in a research project, in a research study as a patient participant, like completing a survey or even participating in a trial. But we are talking about the situation where a person with a disease, with PCD in this case, or family members are active members of the research projects, potentially members of the study team. And so the difference with patient involvement is that we're talking about research with and by the people who have a specific condition or lived experience, instead of someone else doing research about them or for them. And this is a big difference when we're talking about medical research. So there are several levels of involvement. Lucy already mentioned that. I will go through this. I think this is a simple graph that differentiates and shows that not all patient involvement in research is the same. And you can start with level 1, where you can provide information based on the experience that you have living with a disease, and this information will help the research team to develop a project or improve it. You can also give specific advice by responding to questions or provide general advice on a study. And these are usually the basic levels of being involved in a research study. The levels 3 and 4 are the ones where I would refer more as patient partnerships. So we are really talking now about joint decision making. The patient partners are members of the study team. They contribute to important decisions about the study. They contribute to all important discussions. And then in level 4, which for me is an extension of level 3, there are parts of the projects or even whole projects themselves where the patients have a leadership role, and they have a lot of initiative of how a study will go forward. And we will present some examples of the different levels of involvement. Why is this important? I think patient involvement is important from the perspective of the researcher, but also, and then Lucy, we can discuss that more in the discussion afterwards, for the perspective of the patients. First of all, as researchers, it is very important to really understand the priorities and needs of the people that they are affected, and we are interested to do research in this field. Many times medical doctors think that they understand very well their patients, and this might be true, but if you don't discuss the perspectives and priorities of the people who are really affected, you can never speak on their behalf. So if we want to make sure that our research is really oriented towards the patients and relevant for them, we need to involve them in our research. It's also quite important to experience research and healthcare from a different perspective. We all have different perspectives of how we see things in life. I am a researcher, this is my work, so I see research very differently than a patient who participates either as a partner or as a research participant. And from a healthcare perspective, of course, physicians and patients have a very different experience of how they see healthcare and the priorities. So it's you balance a bit each other's biases and perspectives, and you have a more complete image. Improving communication between patients and researchers is very important. Sometimes we do research and then we publish our papers and we think this is enough and everything has finished there. But the most important part is how we disseminate this information to the people who really matter. And to do this, you have to develop this kind of patient partnerships and get the correct advice. How is the best way to reach these people and in which language you should talk to them, so what you produce as research results is understandable and meaningful for them. And also, there are a lot of practical aspects. You want to design a research study and you want to make it in a way that more people will want to participate. Many times we see clinical trials or studies failing because they seem to be very complicated. They have a lot of expectations, time-wise or energy-wise, from the participants. And this is because sometimes we have not considered how difficult some of these aspects and procedures of a study are for people participating. And seeing that from the other side is very important. And I think for patients also contributing to this aspect is important, to actually have research studies that they're catered more towards their needs and situations. And I talked about dissemination. It's very important to be able to produce information that they're tailored for the people who live with a disease, who live with a condition, and that they're easy to understand. Because, of course, we try to publish our papers open access and that people can find them easily online, but that doesn't mean that necessarily a scientific publication is the best way to communicate our research findings with the patients. And how can patients contribute in research? So I have here some examples that I think there are many more, but these are some important aspects to get an idea if you don't have experience with patient partnerships. So starting from the beginning, I think patients can really contribute to help you choose what are the most important questions for them. What, if you want to decide what kind of research you want to do in a field, what are the most important questions for the patients to answer? And then if you want to develop a study on a question, how can this study has the best design to make sure that more people will want to participate, especially for some long-term studies, that the people will not drop out after a few visits. So this is very important. And we always have to prepare this study information for any type of study with patients. And many times this study information is so poorly prepared, so not understandable from people and not so appealing. So your patient partners can really help you to make this material understandable and clear and really speaking to the people who have this condition and motivating them and encourage them to participate. And many times we want to develop questionnaires within a study, or we have a clinical study that has study visits. Are the things that we have planned suitable for the patients? Are the study visits too close? Is it too difficult for them to join a study like that? Are the questionnaires written in a language that it's clear and understandable for them? And are the questions that we have included really relevant for them? So this is something that the patient partners can really help you with. And when you finish your study, you analyze your results, and then you want to understand the study findings before you write your publication. You always see that from the perspective of the researcher or the clinician. So having patient partners really help to see to interpret these findings from the side of the people who are affected and their families, and then to prepare them in a way that they're clear and understandable for everyone, also outside of the scientific community, and to disseminate it in the best way. So yes, publications are the best way maybe to communicate with other colleagues, but maybe we need to find better ways, events or webinars or simple language summaries, newsletters for the participants and the patients affected so that this information reaches them. I have a few examples now, and they are all of them linked to the framework of BEAT-PCD. I mentioned it earlier. This is a clinical research collaboration supported by the European Respiratory Society. We have hundreds and hundreds of clinicians, researchers, and patients and families that they have been linked to BEAT-PCD and involved in these activities, and we work very closely with the European Lung Foundation. As BEAT-PCD, first of all, what we try to do is to have patient partners as a patient advisory group. So the whole network, not just one study, we have this team that participates in meetings that we do whenever we discuss patient engagement activities. They give their input, they share insight from their experiences, they help us to identify priorities for activities, for example, to decide what kind of material, educational material we should develop for people with PCD, or to decide that we will organize a patient conference like we do the last few years. They also provide feedback on studies, so we give them updates on how ongoing studies of BEAT-PCD are going on or what we want to do in the future, and then they give us their feedback if this is something that they find important or not. And many times, especially people who are representatives of support groups, they are helping us to identify participants for these studies or advertise these studies broadly in their network and to disseminate information about BEAT-PCD results from studies and ongoing studies. And as I said, co-organizing the events. We're very proud about our annual patient conference. This year it is on November 29th. And this is fully co-organized and co-led by the patient advisory group and patient volunteers that they give talks in panels about living with PCD, and they co-chair the sessions. This is one of my favorite projects that I have worked in the last few years, and I have worked very closely with Lucy. It has to do with research priorities in the field of PCD from the perspective of patients. So I have run a study from the perspective of researchers and clinicians, and it was obvious since the beginning that we need also to get the perspective of patients and parents. So we made a study team where Lucy and some other patients were members of the study team, and we discussed together the aims of this study and how we will do it. We decided that it will have two parts. A part was interviews with patients, and the other part was a survey that we sent worldwide with the support from ELF. We developed together the invitation for the participants for the interviews and also the survey, and they helped a lot to identify whom to interview. We interviewed some people here in Switzerland, but we also wanted some international volunteers, and here our patient partners really contributed. And then we discussed the interview guide. So what exactly should we ask in the interviews? We wanted to know not only the priorities of the people, but also how informed are they about research and how involved are they. So here, this perspective was very, very helpful for us to develop the guide and later the questionnaire, the survey. And also the wording, is this questionnaire simple enough for people to understand? Is it clear enough? Is this what we really want to ask, or should we rephrase? And when we got all our results, we discussed them. We prepare our tables and everything and discuss them within the study team with the contribution of our patient partners. And we try to put them in perspective and interpret them. And together now, the manuscript is in the last stages of revision, but we have already prepared lay summaries and we translate them in several languages to distribute them in patients around the world. So for me, this is a simple study. So it was mostly some interviews and a questionnaire study. It was not one that ran through many, many years, but it shows a lot of different opportunities of how important it was for me as a researcher to have these patient partnerships for this. As the last example, I have I think the biggest participatory study that exists, maybe not only in the field of PCD, but of chronic lung diseases. This is the Living with PCD study. This is a study that is hosted here at the University of Bern, is led by Claudia Kuehne, who is also in the call, and with support of our PCD research team. And it is co-led by several support groups of PCD worldwide. So this is an international study. It started in 2020 when patient representatives from different groups reached out to Claudia and expressed their worry about COVID-19, the pandemic, and SARS-CoV-2, how it affects them and how dangerous it might be for them, and asked her to develop a study. And the original aims were focused on COVID, but also from the beginning, it was discussed that there are different PCD questions that maybe cannot easily be answered from clinics, but from the patients themselves directly, it's easier. So it's an online study, it's a questionnaire study. There are more than 700 people from 49 studies that participate, and we expect to relaunch that in the next couple of months. So we expect more people joining in, and it is available in 5 languages. So I already said how this was initiated. I have here some of the support groups that really support the study from the beginning, and they participate in a patient advisory board that it is members of the study team in the same way that we are. So we have regular meetings online, we discuss what we will do for the future of the study, how we will continue, from practical aspects like funding and databases to more important aspects like what should be our next questions. We got a lot of really meaningful feedback. For example, we developed a whole series of studies on fertility and the fertility questionnaire based specifically on the feedback of the patient partners, that this is a very important aspect of for them. And now we are developing new projects on social functioning and mental health and treatment burden. And again, all this came from the feedback of our patient partners and from the research priority survey that I mentioned earlier. So this, for me, is an example of participatory research at the level of co-leading, and for several aspects, we even have patient partners taking fully the initiative of developing late summaries, not only helping us translating them. So they have a real leadership role. And these are some of the aspects of the tasks that they are involved. So they have already co-developed the initial aims and all the topics for upcoming special questionnaires together with us. They help us improve the study design. How can we make it easier for people from all over the world to participate? They comment on all the questionnaires, the content, the wording. They contribute to funding or to discussions about how we can get further funding. Translations of the questionnaires in the different languages, help invite participants. The support groups are who invites the participants. And then, very importantly, they comment on all the new concept sheets for new questions, manuscript drafts, lay summaries. And overall, this for me is an excellent example of joint decision making. To close this presentation, I have made the slides of what I consider are the most important principles for successful patient partnerships. And I think this slide and the content will come up in our discussion with Lucy. I think respect is the most important one. We want our patient partnerships to be an environment of safety, of equal trust and voice for all. Many times I have heard from some patients saying that they don't feel so comfortable talking in a room full of researchers and clinicians. And this is not how patient involvement and patient partnerships should work. People should feel comfortable to express their individual opinions, and it is the responsibility of the researcher to create this safe environment. Transparency. I feel like when I work with Lucy or other patient partners, I can really be honest about everything that happens in the study. Many times there are things that you don't anticipate, delays, problems, and you need to talk openly with your patient partners like you will talk with all your partners and discuss this and try to find solutions. But you also need to support patient partners in the way to allow them to have, for me, support and fairness of opportunity go together. You cannot just invite people in a meeting and expect that without having any preparation or any material that they written in a language that it is easy for them to understand, they will feel comfortable to understand everything in a scientific discussion and contribute. So you have to help them prepare to make you create this equal basis of discussion. Accountability. And patient partners are partners. If they take over responsibilities and they are happy to do that, they are accountable in the same way that we are accountable. They should feel honest to say, no, I cannot do that because I don't have time, or I'm happy to do that, and feel not be afraid to say this will be late or we need to change this plan. So it is a really equal relationship. And we need to be responsive. So this is not a one-way relationship. I don't ask questions to my patient partners and expect them to answer them, and then that's it. We need to give feedback back on the input that we got to explain how we will use this input, how this builds into our research. So it is really a back and forth relationship. And it is a mutual understanding of what we want to achieve, but also in the capacities that we have. And I think the capacities is something that will come up in our discussion. So the last thing I will say, and then I will stop sharing the slides, is that patient partnership should always empower patients. It's not only about how the researcher can gain, but it's also how a patient can get stronger through this experience. So I will stop sharing. I hope this set a basis for our discussion. And then where I would start, Lucy, is if a patient really wants to find this interesting and wants to participate, I think I would start from the beginning. Where should they start?
I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Because PCD is often pitched as a, rare disease, and so it's hard to know where to look for information about PCD in this context, let alone what studies are going on. And so whatever condition people have, because people might be watching this that aren't working in PCD, I think it's really or living with PCD. I think it's really useful to go to patient groups. They often are well connected with different clinicians or the research community, and they can signpost you to things that are going on. And so, having been part of a patient group for a long time, I know that we will be contacted by lots of different researchers, and we might have opportunities like a survey, which is something that is quick and someone can just is one off, and they can do it quickly, and they can get involved in research in a very light touch way. We often are given opportunities that come through us for things that are a bit more intensive, so like sitting on a board. And I think the Living with PCD study is an example of a really good opportunity, but it does involve a little bit of a higher level of commitment. And so actually, if you're getting started as a patient and you're interested in research, I think those first steps of light touch things like surveys and maybe an interview, they're really good ways into understanding how these studies work, and actually to get a sense of what you understand about your own condition, and what you kind of are basically learning from being part of these partnerships, because actually they're a bilateral exchange of information often. And so patients sometimes feel like they can't ask questions back, but they should feel able to say, if they're in an interview with someone, is this something that other people say, how does this fit in with the bigger picture? And actually you can learn a lot that way. But I think first steps is probably the lighter touch, things like surveys, interviews, and going to patient organizations and your own clinicians to ask, is there anything that I can get involved with at the moment?
You mentioned patient organizations, and I think this is also the answer from the researcher perspective. Like many times clinicians or researchers might think, I don't know where to start. And I think you, first of all, you can start slow and you can also start, you don't need necessarily the first project that you want to develop with patient involvement to be a fully participatory study. But you can always involve patients. So you can start either with patients that you know from your clinic that you have access to, or go to the patient support group that you might have in your country. And if you don't have a patient support group in the country, I think ELF is great in helping finding people with a specific disease that they want to be involved. And I think also within BEAT-PCD we can help. So if there are people who want to do that, they can reach out and we can help them to guide them towards this direction.
I think often when you're working with a patient organization as a patient representative, we are approached by researchers who are at the later stages of their research. And I don't know whether sometimes researchers might feel that, oh, we have to have a good plan for this research before we go and approach a patient group or before we approach patients. But if you're a researcher or a clinician, you should be reassured that actually patients would prefer to be there at the beginning with you, and we'd prefer to do that journey from the beginning. And we don't think anything less of your qualification or your credibility if you don't quite know where that question is going, because actually it's a really empowering thing for patient and patient organizations to build that together. And I think it might take longer. You might have to do things differently, but actually the quality at the end is really good, but also the relevance. So we talk about, you don't have to have a big study ready to go. You can have something small. And I think actually you talked earlier, Myrona, about how fertility came up as a topic in the Living with PCD study. And I think this is a really good example because um, I remember years ago, I would talk to individuals with PCD, and we would, at the end of the conversation, someone would say, "What do you know about fertility?" Or, it was an awkward conversation. It was quite awkward for people to have. There wasn't much information about it. Many years ago, there was only, a couple of researchers that we were aware of that did a bit about fertility in PCD. Johanna in Germany being one of them. Johanna, I'm sorry, I've forgotten her surname. And but there wasn't much research at all. And actually, it was through, we had these conversations, and we in the patient community, there were more and more people that were happy to say, where's the research in fertility? This is not just a lung disease. This is a disease that has impact on other areas. And it was actually researchers like yourself, Myrona, who picked up on that question that we all had, and you were able to turn it into something that was a veritable piece of research. And I think that's a really good example of a small question. It was a small questionnaire, but actually it's the start of a lot more interest that seems to be growing at the moment about aspects of PCD that I think if we hadn't have had those conversations, we still wouldn't be talking about today. What do you think?
I completely agree. I mean, for me, it is never too early to involve your patient partners. If you want to do a study, the moment that the study is an idea, it's already a good time to do that. Because you want the feedback early enough, and also this co-development process not only makes the question more meaningful, but it helps to develop this relationship into a more equal relationship and to motivate the patients to be involved and to contribute. And also for other practical aspects. Like I usually, you know that very well now, but I usually involve and inform potential patient partners before even I will apply for funding for a project. Because I want to know if this is something that it's interesting for them, to reach out and say, if this is funded, if I manage to do it and start with it, would you be happy to join and discuss and help make it better? This is an idea, how we can make this idea into an actual project. And you can also then make sure that they know details about how long this project will be. Some projects are very short, some projects require a commitment. And even aspects like you mentioned in your short introduction, things like compensation of patients. This is an important but difficult discussion, I think, in the framework of patient partnerships, mostly because not in all countries the situation is at exactly at the same level in the discussions. So with that, just to explain, we mean that how should the patient partners who contribute their time and expertise in a project should be compensated for that financially or with other ways. And it differs so much. There are countries, and then you can tell us about UK, Lucy, that they have very specific guidelines for this. In Switzerland, we are, I think, now doing a bit the first steps on that. So our big national foundations for some project fundings now, it says that you can budget some part of the funding for this, and I think this is very good. But that means that you have to consider it before you apply for funding and not be in the middle of the project and then say, oh, I would like to involve patient partners, because then you will not have this opportunity. And again, there are countries where this is not at all possible. So it is a big discussion. I don't know if you want to share about UK.
Yeah, I think so. From firstly, from the perspective of if you're a patient and you're interested in getting involved in research, I think you have to really weigh up the, how necessary it is to, take on opportunities that are paid versus not. So at the moment, I'd say the majority of the opportunities that exist in PCD are not paid,
Mhm.
and that is unfortunately just how it is. I feel very, very lucky that there is even research in PCD, and I think I'd hope that in another 10 years' time, we will move from the feeling of aren't we lucky that some people are researching this condition to an expectation that if you are involved in research as a partner, then you are going to be compensated for the time that you are contributing to that. I think we're at that period at the moment where some things are compensated, some things aren't. And what we really need to think about is we need to diversify who is taking part in research, particularly in a rare disease like PCD, where although there's not that many people, the experience of people with PCD are very, very, very different. And so I feel very strongly that it should not always be like me turning up to all these studies. It should be lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds. But we can only get those people if we make it possible for them, and paying them is part of that. So not everybody is able to take an hour out of their day during work time. Not everyone is able to afford to be able to lose that time. And so I think that is something that is going to be an emerging issue for research in PCD. And we have, as a community of patients, patient groups, and researchers and clinicians, we have got to start thinking about that more proactively. But in the UK, and I'll drop this into the chat, there is some guidance from the National Institute of Health Research, NIHR, about paying people for their involvement in research. I use it in my day job, which is not to do with PCD. It's quite good guidance, and it is structured around the level of commitment that is required. So if someone's answering a survey, you might not really pay them, but if someone is there for a day of meetings and they have to prepare for that, well, that is something that requires consideration. So I think my strong feeling as a patient and patient group representative is that if you're a researcher and you're planning your studies, it is unethical not to be building in some compensation for your patient partners if you have that opportunity. So I recognize that not everyone has that opportunity, but yeah, it's complicated, but it is slowly changing, and that's really good. I've put the link in the chat.
Thank you. No, it is a very important point, and it goes together with the point of the compensation. I think you also touch upon availability and the involvement of different people from not always having someone like you or the same people who are maybe support group representatives participating in studies. For me, this is very important. It goes together with the compensation, but it goes also beyond that. For example, many times research say I cannot fit in my schedule, my daily work schedule, to also do this in addition to my work. And then sometimes I feel like I want to tell them, you have to be flexible. If you want these people, even if you manage to compensate them or if you don't, if you want these people to be your patient partners and to really contribute to your research, you cannot expect that they will do it under your own conditions always, in your timeline, during your working hours, because they have work, they have life, they have caring responsibilities, they have also a lot of healthcare responsibilities, and they live with a disease that takes so much of their daily time. So I think this is something that people tend to forget. And when we are talking about respect and equal relationships and contributions to the project, we need to try and find ways to go around that. Many times we need to find time slots for a meeting that would fit these people, even if, I mean, that it should maybe go without the question, right?
Yeah, I think this is really true. And there's something else that is really important to remember, which is that money is not the only thing that you will get from research. And in fact, in many situations, it's the least important thing. You learn a lot. And there are other ways to recognize your patient
Mhm.
partners than financial compensation. So something that I feel that over the years, I started out by answering surveys, doing occasional interviews, and then I have grown in experience. And now my involvement in research is more taking part in study design and thinking about lay summaries and how do we make these research findings as understandable to patients and the community as possible. And so something that has I've really enjoyed benefiting from is authorships. So
Mhm.
if I am participating as part of the study design team and I'm saying, actually, I think we need to structure these questions differently. Could we categorize it here? Could we code this bit of data under this different theme that seems more appropriate? That is a valid contribution that I am very, very grateful that with partnerships like with you, Myrona, I've been recognized for that. And I think that means a lot to me. I see it as professional development as well as a kind of opportunity sort of personally. And I think it's something that researchers can do quite easily and usually not at a huge expense to them, but that actually means a lot to patients and to patient groups.
I think for me, this is a very basic recognition for someone's really important contribution in a research study. And it goes together with how you perceive patient partnership. So many times we discuss together, Lucy, and I tell you that this is not a replaceable position. It's not that I want to work with two patients and you are one of them, and if you're not available, I will find someone to replace you. It is a partnership with an individual who has this lived experience, who has this disease, or who is a parent of a child with this disease. And we need to work around your schedules if this doesn't work. And you're not replaceable in the same way that my other research partners are not replaceable. And in the same way, I'm also choosing sometimes whom to approach. For example, I say for this project, I will ask this person that I know who has PCD or who is a parent of a person with PCD to be involved, because I think that they have this experience and this experience. And I also know that from their job, even they have this skill that can contribute to the study. It's really, I select my patient partners in the same way that I select my research partners, because they are research partners.
And I think that's really, really important. And if you're a patient watching this and thinking, "Oh, I'm never going to get the skill level because I don't work in science," or, that doesn't matter. You build it very, very slowly, and good researchers and good clinicians will bring you along on the journey, and they will take extra time to inform you about what something means, to help translate the scientific language of a study to make it understandable for you. And so I think actually, whilst there are different, I think it's right, there are different levels of participation, and we need different types of patients for different things. And I think that is how we, like you say, we would select for a job. And I think in research is really important, because the worst scenario is where you have someone who's never been involved before and they're not confident with research terminology, or they're not confident with how maybe research design works. And you bring them in and you don't give them that support,
Mhm.
and then they think, what was that about? They don't engage, then they drop out, and then they never get involved in research again because they had that one negative experience. And I think this is something that we have to avoid. Because we are dealing with a small community in PCD and in other rare diseases as well. You're dealing with very small communities, very small populations, and it's really, really important that we don't lose opportunities to engage as many of those views and perspectives as possible. So we need to kind of understand people's prior experiences. And as a patient, and I know that people, my colleagues who also have PCD, they would not be offended if someone says to them, you know, I'm a researcher. Have you ever been involved in this kind of thing? What tools do you need to be able to participate in this as an equal partner? Because there's nothing worse than sitting around a table and thinking, I have no idea what's going on. So I think if you're a researcher and you're designing studies, do not be afraid that you shouldn't be afraid to ask people, you know, what they need, and you shouldn't be afraid to select people based on the skills as much as their experience. So this is a bad moment for for Myrona to cough as I pass back to her.
No, no, no. This is a very important. I think you're touching upon the potential dangers and negative experience that someone can have from being involved in a project as patient partners. And I have seen it myself without naming names or situations and without talking necessarily about PCD. But I have seen it myself sitting in a room with some patient partners. There's also still the phenomena of this. Patient token where we have these big committees of 20, 25 researchers and one patient in the room who is not prepared, who doesn't feel comfortable to express their voice. I think we have moved really beyond that. I see it still sometimes and it saddens me, but this is really a responsibility of the responsible researcher to make sure that this will not be the case. And as you said, that the patient partner will not have this negative experience, because that could lead to a person never want to do this again. And it's not just about not, you also don't get what you want from this partnership for your research, but you also discourage this person from doing this ever again in the future.
I agree. I think there's another thing that comes to mind when we're talking about sort of involving people, and that is that you shouldn't rely. So it's important to involve patients in research design, but I think it's also important not to rely on one patient's opinion to determine whether that is the right course of action for that study. So you need to test it, you need to go out and you need to find other opinions. And there's an anecdote that I have where I will always live in regret of this, and feel really bad that it ever happened. But I was asked by a study about a protocol for some research, and that protocol involved patients needing to have a bronchoscopy. And so I looked at it and I thought, well, okay, that sounds sensible. You know, you go in, you have to have a bronchoscopy, and then, you know, this is part of the research. And I said, yeah, I think patients will be okay with that. I've never had a bronchoscopy myself, and I wasn't allowed to talk about this study with anybody else. And so at a later date, I mentioned this to someone and they said, oh, I had a bronchoscopy once, I'd never do that again. And I spoke to another person and they had had a negative experience. Now, not everybody has negative experience of bronchoscopy, but it turned out that this was something for some people. It was a deterrent to them being involved in the study. And what I found really stressful was that I was the only person that had been consulted about whether that was acceptable. And I said, oh, yeah, I think it probably would be, based on the limited knowledge I have. And so I really regret that that was not an opportunity where maybe more people were consulted. And I think when we're designing research, we have people that are involved in the research design that have a patient experience perspective, but that should not be the only testing that we do before we move on. So we've got to get that balance right, I think.
I think that we can go back and forth for hours, Lucy, to be honest, but maybe we use now the time to see if we have any questions from the people in the meeting. And if not, there are still things that I can ask you, but I think there are some comments in the chat.
Yes, so as a reminder to people who want to ask question, you can either raise your hand and ask the question, or you can write them in the chat and I will read them out loud for Lucy and Myrona. But while you do that, I will be selfish and I will ask the first question if that's fine. So I had a look at the list of people attending today, and I realized that a lot of them are either full-time researchers or are doing research at least part-time. So Lucy, from your perspective, what were the biggest barriers to your involvement in research? In other words, what shall we do better as researchers to involve patient partners in our research?
I think that's a really difficult question. So I think sometimes not knowing how long your commitment is needed for is very hard. And I know as researchers, it's hard for you to know how long a study is going to continue for. But there was a study not to do with PCD that I joined at the beginning of the pandemic, and they said, "Oh, we think it will be 1 year commitment." And 4 years on, I'm still part of this research management group, and sometimes it's quite intensive, and you're trying. I work full time. I have a young child. You're trying to fit this in around what is already a very packed schedule. And so the best thing that you can do is be honest as researchers, and I think give as much time for preparation as possible and as much time for booking in meetings. If someone comes to me and says, "Oh, let's do a meeting next week," a lot of the time I can't make that happen. So we need, and it feels, I'm sure it's very frustrating for you as researchers because you want to get on, you've got work to do, and sometimes you think, "Oh, we need this meeting," but it's only a quick thing. But actually, if you're a patient and you're getting involved in these sorts of things, I think it's useful to be asked from the beginning. So what works for you? How much time do you need? Do you ever need help with going through the papers? And it can just be like a screening questionnaire at the beginning. How can we make this easy for you to get involved? And so I think that's the best thing is to start off from the outset, because if you can identify at the beginning, actually that might not work for us, then maybe you have a conversation with that person and say, "Look, I think this is going to be difficult." Last thing is just to Myrona's point, I will struggle sometimes to meet people in the daytime. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. So having a bit of flexibility about those hours. Often these meetings are not all the time. They're, every month, maybe more than that. So being able to do just slightly different hours is really, really helpful for being involved. Thank you.
So basically meet you guys where you're at.
Absolutely, yeah.
I see Claudia wants to ask a question or make a comment. So Claudia.
Yes, maybe you could add a bit. There is this possibility of becoming expert patient representatives, which is quite useful and often demanded if you want to do that with a higher percentage and paid, for instance, in a funding association as the Swiss Science Foundation, which now pays patient representatives actually to look through grant applications and assess whether patient views and needs are adequately addressed. And this is an expense. It takes a bit of time, and it can be expensive. Sometimes there's a possibility that the funding agency or somebody pays for that. And I think it is a possibility. It's not at all needed to take part in research projects, but if you would like to do that part-time or full-time work, this isn't a possibility. Just to know, maybe you can, Lucy and Myrona, you can expand on that if there are experiences in the UK. I know it from Switzerland only.
I don't know about the UK. Lucy, you can tell us afterwards, but I know that in general in Europe there is the BEAT-PCD program, that it is education for patient expert training. And it is a full program that has a call, I think, once a year, and then you can register and you complete a series of courses. I know people in Switzerland that they have done it, and they speak very highly about it. And actually, this is for people who want to do this even a bit more professionally, and especially to be able to ask for compensation for projects that really require a lot of their time or they're long term. And I think they help a lot with the preparation for understanding scientific language and what it means to participate in a research project. And I still think that some preparation is needed for every project, but you start with a bit on a different, like one step, I would say, at least up, and helps you to have a better start in being involved in research. I don't know if you have something different or if you just participate in these programs from UK, Lucy.
I'm not aware of anything, but I wouldn't claim to be the expert in knowing what's available. I think my only anxiety, I guess, about this kind of expert patient is I think the professionalization of patients is an ethical issue that we don't have time for today. But I go back to I still believe recruiting people based on their skill set in addition to their patient experience. And there are some things that I've attended where I see the same people come again and again and again, and it's often not relevant. It's clear that that opportunity is not relevant. It's just that those people have professionalized themselves because they have a particular condition. This is not in the PCD world, by the way. And I do think that is ethically problematic. This is like, if you're going to be a consultant, little c, then I think you need to be there because you've got the right skills in addition to that experience. I noticed that there's a question in the chat about engaging children as active partners in patient participatory research. Is it okay for us to maybe address that now, Myrona? Because I think that's a really interesting question, Vasiliki. I think we need to get more and more young people involved in research. They are a really underserved and underrepresented group. Their experiences are often very, very different to 18 plus. Even capturing that 16 to 18 bracket is really, really important. And in a condition like PCD, where you've got that transition from doing your treatments, your parents are doing treatments to you, and then you are taking over the independence of those treatments. I think we are missing a huge cohort of people there. The difficulty is always managing the ethics around patient involvement when you've got younger children involved. And Myrona, I don't know if this is something that I certainly have felt nervous about doing this as part of a patient group organization, because you want to be really careful that you are protecting and safeguarding those children as much as possible. And so I have avoided it in the past because we didn't have the time and the resource. But in the future, I think we would intend to try to look very, very carefully about how we can do that in a very ethical way. But I think it's a really important issue.
I think there are different partnerships, the ones that you can develop with children. I know, for example, for the adolescents, that the ELF has now newly created this youth group for adolescents with respiratory diseases, and it also helps to that they are networking with each other, although they have sometimes different diseases, and it helps them to see that they have an interest in research and others share their experiences. For younger children, I think parents are your ally. You have to navigate this very importantly, especially for ethical perspectives. But you cannot have the expectations from a child with or without a disease that you have from a research partner that's either a researcher or a patient. We have been in contact with some researchers here in Switzerland, actually, that they use different ways of involving patients in general, and that can work also for children in research, some art-based ways sometimes. And I think there are also some studies that I know, not from PCD, where they have asked children to take photographs to somehow capture their environment and their perspective. So I think there are ways. You just need to be very careful and to have a very specific aspect of the research that you want to include them. But I do find it very important because I also don't think that parents can capture necessarily the perspective of the children.
This question has reminded me of an activity that we did years ago. We had during the pandemic, we had an online camp for people with PCD in the UK for children, and we got someone called a graphic recorder, so an artist. They came and they helped people with children with PCD design superheroes. And it wasn't a study, but I think it should have been a study, because actually each of these individual children, and they were very different ages, everything from about 6 years old through to kind of 15, and they were identifying features about PCD that made them a superhero. And so it was a really positive approach to framing and understanding their experience of PCD. So we were very mindful of it not being a traumatic experience where they go away thinking, I hate this condition. It was a way of them kind of identifying things that made them stronger and gave them extra. And this was all illustrated. And I think those sorts of approaches work really, really well with children, and it helps us understand their experiences firsthand. But it needs a lot of thought, and it needs a lot of consideration and planning behind it. But yeah, definitely would love to see more research with young people in this area.
I think we are on time. I think there is one more question in the chat, but I will try to be respectful of people's time. We could have a follow-up at some point on this topic, and also maybe try to involve even more researchers and more patients or parents. I think it's an important topic. I hope the participants today found that useful. I'm really, really grateful, Lucy, that you found the time and that we did this together. And I think it's very important to talk more about PCD, certainly this October, but all the time. So I hope this will open more the discussions about the PCD partnerships. There are some discussions, some comments and questions from patients in the chat. I will just say this before I close this for today at the website. And we can try to do our best to help. So thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening.